My entire childhood, I believed my father walked away from us when I was 6. Then a hospital mailed me a package after he died, and inside were letters that made me question everything my mother ever told me. My name is Sophia Thompson, and for most of my life the story about my father was simple. He left. That's the version I grew up with in Raleigh, North Carolina. My mom, Olivia, told the story the same way every time. Your dad couldn't handle responsibility, she would say. Some people just aren't built for family life. When you hear the same explanation your entire childhood, it stops sounding like an opinion. It becomes history. So in my mind, my father, Elijah Thompson, was just a man who decided he didn't want us. My mom raised me alone in a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of Raleigh. She worked long hours as an office clerk at a medical clinic, the kind of job where everything revolves around schedules, paperwork, and keeping things organized. That was basically her personality too. Everything had structure. Bills paid on time. Groceries every Sunday. Laundry every Wednesday night. She liked routines, and our life followed them closely. Growing up, I didn't think of us as struggling. We weren't rich, but we were stable. My mom made sure of that. The only thing missing from our life was my dad. And honestly, as a kid, I didn't question it that much. Kids are weirdly good at accepting whatever reality they're given. It wasn't until elementary school that I started noticing the difference. My friend Clara Nelson lived 3 houses down from us. Her dad drove her to school every morning in this loud pickup truck that rattled the entire street. Sometimes I'd be walking to the bus stop and he'd wave at me like we were old friends. "Morning, Sophia," he'd shout. I'd wave back. Then I'd get on the bus alone. Little things like that started making me curious. One afternoon when I was about 9, I asked my mom about my dad again. We were sitting at the kitchen table while she sorted mail. "Do you think he ever thinks about me?" I asked. She paused for a second. Not long, but long enough that I remember noticing it. Then she sighed softly. "I'm sure he does sometimes," she said. "But people make choices, sweetheart." That was the closest thing to an explanation I ever got. And for a while, that was enough. But when I was 10, something happened at school that changed how I thought about him. Our teacher assigned a project called Letters to Family. The idea was simple. We had to write a letter to a family member describing our life and asking them questions about theirs. Most kids picked grandparents. A few wrote to cousins. I remember sitting there staring at the blank paper, thinking about my dad. I realized something weird. I didn't actually know anything about him. Not what he did for work. Not where he lived. Not what kind of person he was. So that night, I asked my mom if I could write him a letter. The question made her visibly uncomfortable. She was standing at the sink washing dishes when I asked. "To your dad," she said. "Yeah." She turned the water off and thought about it. For a moment I wondered if she was going to say no. But then she nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. "If that's what you want." The next evening we sat at the kitchen table together while I wrote it. I still remember parts of it. "Hi, Dad. My name is Sophia. I'm in 5th grade now. I like art and science class. Do you ever think about me?" It was the kind of letter a kid writes when they're trying to sound grown up. When I finished, my mom folded it carefully and put it in an envelope. "We'll mail it tomorrow," she said. And we did. I remember feeling strangely hopeful that week. Even though I had spent my whole life believing my dad didn't care about me, writing that letter felt like opening a door. Maybe he'd respond. Maybe we'd start talking. Maybe things would be different. A few weeks later, my mom came home from work holding a small envelope. "It's from your dad," she said. My heart started pounding immediately. I took the letter to my room before opening it. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a long explanation. Maybe an apology. Maybe something emotional. Instead, the letter was short. Very short. It said, "Hi, Sophia. I'm glad you're doing well in school. I hope you continue working hard and have a good life." That was it. No questions. No personal details. No emotion. Just a polite response that felt distant. I remember sitting on my bed reading it over and over, trying to find something meaningful hidden in those sentences. But there wasn't anything there. It felt like the kind of message you'd send to someone you barely knew. At the time, that hurt more than if he hadn't responded at all. Because it meant he got my letter. He just didn't care enough to say more. Over the next few years, that became the pattern. Sometimes I'd write to him. Sometimes a letter would come back. Every response looked the same. Short. Neutral. Emotionally empty. "Glad you're doing well. Hope school is going well. Take care." Eventually, I stopped expecting anything different. By the time I was 14, I had already formed a clear opinion about my father. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't angry. He just didn't care. One night when I was a teenager, I remember telling my mom exactly that. If he actually cared about me, I said, he'd try harder. She didn't argue. She just nodded slowly and said, "Some people don't know how to be parents." At the time, that explanation felt logical. So I stopped writing to him. And eventually, I stopped thinking about him altogether. Life moved forward. I finished high school. I moved away to college. Eventually, I settled in Albany, New York, where I started working as a graphic artist for a small marketing company. My life became busy. New job, new apartment, new friends. One of my closest friends there was Lucas Jones, a software developer who lived 2 floors above me. We spent a lot of evenings sitting on the fire escape talking about work and life and random nonsense. By my late 20s, my father had become something like a distant memory. Not painful, just irrelevant. Then about 8 months ago, I got a phone call that changed everything. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was working. The number was unfamiliar. When I answered, a woman's voice said gently, "Hello, may I speak with Sophia Thompson?" "Yes, this is Sophia. My name is Mia Lewis. I'm a registered nurse calling from a hospital in Santa Fe, New Mexico." Immediately my stomach tightened. Hospitals don't call people with good news. She continued carefully. "We're trying to locate the next of kin for a patient named Elijah Thompson. Your name was listed among his personal belongings." For a second, I didn't respond. Hearing my father's name out loud after so many years felt strange. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "I'm very sorry to inform you that he passed away earlier today." And, just like that, the man I had spent my entire life believing didn't care about me was gone. The nurse explained that he had suffered a sudden heart attack. He had lived alone. There were no other family contacts listed. Then she asked a simple question. "Would you like us to send you his personal belongings?" At the time, I almost said no. I didn't feel connected to him. But something made me hesitate. "Yeah," I said quietly. "You can send them." I didn't realize then that agreeing to receive that package would completely dismantle the story of my childhood. Because a few weeks later, a small box arrived at my apartment in Albany. And inside it was something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about my parents. The box from Santa Fe sat on my kitchen table for almost an hour before I opened it. It wasn't large. Just a plain cardboard shipping box with my name written in black marker. No return address except the hospital. For most of that hour, I kept walking past it. Part of me wasn't sure why I had even agreed to receive it. My father had been a stranger my entire life. Whatever was inside that box probably wouldn't change that. But eventually curiosity won. I grabbed a kitchen knife, cut the tape, and lifted the flaps open. Inside were a few ordinary things. A worn leather wallet, some loose photographs, a couple folded documents. And at the bottom of the box, there was a thick bundle of envelopes held together with a faded rubber band. At first, I assumed they were bills or paperwork. Then I noticed something strange. Every single envelope had the same name written on it. Mine, Sophia Thompson. I froze for a second. There were dozens of them. Some envelopes looked yellowed with age, the paper slightly curled at the edges like they had been sitting somewhere for years. I slowly picked up the stack. Each envelope had my name and what looked like my childhood address in Raleigh, North Carolina, written in careful handwriting. My father's handwriting, I assumed. But something about them was odd. None of them had stamps. No postmarks. Just sealed envelopes that had never been mailed. I remember standing there in my kitchen staring at them, trying to understand what I was looking at. Then I opened one. The paper inside was neatly folded. The date at the top caught my attention immediately. It was from the same year I had written my first letter to him in 5th grade. My hands suddenly felt unsteady. I started reading. "Dear Sophia, I got your letter today, and I want you to know it meant more to me than I can explain. I've thought about writing to you many times, but I didn't want to make things harder for you. Still, hearing from you made me incredibly happy." I stopped reading. That sentence alone didn't make sense. The letter I remembered receiving from him back then had been short, cold, almost dismissive. This wasn't that letter. This one sounded emotional, personal. I kept reading. "I'm proud of you for writing to me. 5th grade is an exciting time. When I was your age, I used to spend all my afternoons drawing in notebooks and pretending I was designing cars. Your interest in art sounds a lot more creative than anything I ever did." My heart started beating faster. He continued asking questions. What was my favorite class? Did I still like drawing? What books was I reading? Then one line made my chest tighten. "I wish I could be there to see these things in person." I lowered the paper slowly. This letter was nothing like the one I remembered receiving as a kid. Not even close. The one I got back then had been 3 sentences. This one was nearly 2 pages long. I grabbed another envelope from the stack. Then another. And another. Every single one was the same. Long. Thoughtful. Full of questions about my life. They talked about birthdays he knew he had missed. School years he wondered about. Even random little things. In one letter, he wrote about working long shifts as a postal worker in Santa Fe. He mentioned a coworker named Mateo Davis who kept bringing donuts to work every Friday. In another letter, he talked about a neighbor, Violet Allen, who would occasionally check in on him when he was sick. These weren't generic letters. They were detailed, personal, written by someone who clearly spent a lot of time thinking about me. And suddenly I felt something cold creeping into my stomach. Because if these letters existed, then the ones I remembered receiving growing up didn't make sense anymore. I went back to the first envelope and looked at it more carefully. Still no stamp. No postmark. None of them had ever been mailed, which meant they had never been sent to me. I sat down at the kitchen table and spread several of them out. The dates stretched across years. Some were written when I was 11. Some when I was 13. Some when I was 16. He had been writing to me the entire time. But somehow those letters had never reached me. That realization alone was confusing. But the next thought hit me even harder. If these were the letters he actually wrote, then what about the letters I received growing up? The ones I remembered reading as a kid. The short ones. The ones that sounded distant. Suddenly a small detail resurfaced in my memory. Those letters had always looked different. Not handwritten. Typed. At the time, I had assumed my father just preferred typing. But now the memory felt strange. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the stack of envelopes. My apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. My brain started replaying small details I had ignored as a kid. The wording in those letters. The tone. The way they always sounded polite but emotionally empty. And then another realization hit me. The phrasing. It sounded familiar. Too familiar. Like someone else's voice. Someone I had grown up hearing every day. My mother's. I sat there for a long time staring at those envelopes, trying to convince myself that thought was ridiculous. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. My father had written dozens of letters that were never mailed. Yet, somehow I had still received responses from him growing up. Short responses. Typed responses. My chest tightened as the possibility formed in my head. What if those letters never came from him at all? I suddenly felt the overwhelming urge to talk to someone. So I grabbed my phone and called Lucas Jones. He answered on the second ring. Hey, what's up? I didn't know how to explain it at first. Remember how I told you my dad passed away a few weeks ago? Yeah. Well, the hospital sent me a box of his stuff today. Okay. I looked down at the letters spread across my table. There are dozens of letters in here addressed to me, I said slowly. Lucas sounded confused. So he wrote to you? No, I said quietly. That's the thing. I picked up another envelope. They were never mailed. There was a short silence on the phone. Then Lucas said carefully, what do you mean never mailed? No stamps. No postmarks. Nothing. I paused. And the letters inside don't match the ones I remember getting as a kid. Another silence. Then Lucas asked the question I was already thinking. So if those are the real letters? Yeah, I said. My voice felt tight. Then who wrote the ones I actually received? Neither of us said anything for a moment. But the answer was already sitting in the back of my mind. And the more I looked at those envelopes, the harder it became to ignore the possibility that the story I had believed my entire life might have been built on something else entirely. That night, I didn't sleep much. The letters stayed spread across my kitchen table while I paced around my apartment in Albany. Every time I tried to convince myself I was overthinking things, I'd reread another letter and the same uncomfortable thought would return. Something about my childhood story didn't add up. Around 2 in the morning, I opened one of the later letters again. The paper was newer, the handwriting slightly shakier. At the top it said, Dear Sophia, I know you probably won't see this letter either, but I still write them sometimes. It helps me feel like I'm talking to you. I stopped reading. Won't see this letter either. That sentence made my stomach tighten. He already knew. He knew the letters weren't reaching me. I sat down and kept reading. I tried sending letters before, but your mom asked me not to contact you directly anymore. She said it would only confuse you. I don't know if that's true, but I don't want to make your life harder. I leaned back in the chair slowly. My father hadn't just been writing letters. He had been trying to send them. And somehow they stopped reaching me. The more I thought about it, the more details from my childhood started resurfacing. Small moments I never questioned at the time. Like how every letter from my father had arrived through my mom. She was always the one who handed them to me. Sometimes she'd say, your dad wrote back. Other times she'd just leave the envelope on the kitchen counter. But I never actually saw them arrive in the mailbox. Not once. At the time, that seemed normal. Now it didn't. I picked up my phone again and called Lucas. He answered groggily. Please tell me you finally went to sleep. I think my mom wrote those letters. There was a long pause. Whoa, he said quietly. Yeah. I explained what I had just read. Lucas listened carefully. So your dad says he tried writing to you, but your mom told him not to? That's what the letter says. And the ones you actually received were typed? Every single one. Lucas exhaled slowly. That's pretty weird. I rubbed my forehead. Yeah. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then Lucas asked the question I had been avoiding. Are you going to ask her about it? The thought made my stomach twist. I don't know. Because if what you're thinking is true, I know. If my mom had been intercepting those letters, that meant my entire understanding of my father might have been wrong. But confronting her also meant something else. It meant questioning the person who had raised me my entire life. And that felt terrifying in a different way. I ended the call around 3 in the morning and sat at the table again. Eventually, I gathered the letters into a neat stack and placed them back in the box. Then I stared at the box for a long time. By the time the sun started coming up, I had already made the decision. I needed to talk to my mom. Not over the phone. Not through messages. In person. 2 days later, I requested time off from work and booked a flight to Raleigh, North Carolina. The flight itself felt strangely quiet. I kept replaying memories in my head. All the times my mom had told the story about my dad leaving. All the times I repeated that story to other people. Yeah, he left when I was 6. It had always sounded like a simple fact. Now it felt like something else entirely. When my plane landed in Raleigh that afternoon, the air felt warmer than I remembered. The airport looked smaller too. Everything about my hometown felt slightly unfamiliar, like I was seeing it through a different lens. My mom still lived in the same house I grew up in. Same quiet street. Same narrow driveway. Same white siding that probably hadn't been repainted in 20 years. When I knocked on the door, she answered almost immediately. Sophia? She looked surprised but happy. What are you doing here? I wanted to visit. That wasn't technically a lie. She hugged me tightly. I wish you had told me you were coming. Yeah, I said quietly. Me too. Inside, the house looked almost exactly the same as it had when I was a kid. Same furniture. Same kitchen table. Same framed photos on the walls. One of those photos showed me at about 8 years old holding a science fair ribbon. My mom followed my gaze. You were so proud that day, she said. I nodded. Then I set the cardboard box on the kitchen table. Her eyes moved to it. What's that? Something the hospital sent me. She frowned slightly. Hospital. My dad passed away, I said. The room went quiet. My mom sat down slowly. Oh, she said softly. For a moment, she looked genuinely sad. I'm sorry to hear that. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. So I opened the box and took out the bundle of letters. Her expression changed almost immediately. Not dramatically. Just a subtle shift. Her shoulders stiffened slightly. What are those? She asked. Letters. She didn't say anything. I slid one envelope across the table. They're all addressed to me. She glanced at the handwriting. Then looked away. Where did you get them? They were in his apartment. Still no reaction. So I said the next part carefully. They were never mailed. Now she looked at me. Her face stayed calm, but something in her eyes had changed. I placed another envelope on the table. And the letters inside don't match the ones I remember getting as a kid. She stared at the envelopes for several seconds. Then she said quietly, What are you trying to ask me, Sophia? My throat felt tight. I took a slow breath. Did you stop his letters from reaching me? The kitchen suddenly felt very quiet. My mom didn't answer right away. She just looked down at the envelopes again. For a long time. And in that silence, I realized something before she even spoke. She already knew exactly what those letters were. Because when she finally looked up at me, there was no confusion in her face. Only resignation. My mom didn't deny it. Not right away. She sat there at the kitchen table in Raleigh staring at the envelopes like they were old photographs she didn't want to look at anymore. For a moment I thought she might try to explain it away. Or pretend she didn't know what I was talking about. But instead, she exhaled slowly and leaned back in her chair. How many did you find? She asked. The question hit me harder than any denial would have. Dozens, I said. She nodded once, like that number made sense to her. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. The quiet felt heavier than any argument. Finally, I asked the question again. Did you stop his letters from reaching me? My mom rubbed her hands together on the table, thinking. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. It wasn't that simple. That sentence immediately made my chest tighten. Because it wasn't no. She looked up at me. When your father and I divorced, things were messy, she said. Her voice stayed calm, almost clinical, like she was describing someone else's life. He wanted shared custody. I didn't think that was a good idea. Why? I asked. She hesitated. Because he wasn't stable back then. What does that mean? He didn't have steady work. He moved around a lot. I didn't think that was the kind of environment you needed. I frowned. But the court still allowed visitation, right? She looked slightly surprised that I knew that. Yes. So what happened? My mom stared at the table again. I moved us to Raleigh. I know that part. I didn't tell him right away. The sentence landed between us like something fragile breaking. You didn't tell him where we moved? I asked. Her expression tightened. I told him eventually. But not at first. She didn't answer. I felt my heartbeat getting faster. So he tried writing letters? Yes. And you got them? Yes. Then why didn't you give them to me? My mom looked at me for a long moment. Then she said quietly, because I thought it would make things harder for you. I almost laughed. Hearing from my father would make things harder? You were 6, Sophia. So you were adjusting to a new life, she said. A new school. A new home. That doesn't explain 20 years. The words came out sharper than I expected. She didn't react. Instead, she folded her hands together and spoke slowly. Your father and I argued constantly during the divorce. Every conversation turned into a fight. That happens in divorces. Yes, she said. But I didn't want you caught in the middle of that. So you decided the solution was to erase him from my life? I didn't erase him. I gestured toward the letters. You hid dozens of letters from me. Her voice stayed calm. I was protecting you. The phrase felt almost surreal. From what? From confusion. I stared at her. That doesn't make sense. She sighed. When he first started writing letters, you would get excited. You'd ask when you could see him, when he was coming back, because he was my father. And he wasn't going to be around, she said quietly. I leaned forward. You didn't know that. I did. How? Her eyes hardened slightly. Because I knew him better than you did. The conversation felt like it was circling something we hadn't said yet. I picked up one of the envelopes. So instead of letting me read his letters, you wrote your own? She didn't respond immediately. But she also didn't deny it. Those letters I received growing up, I said slowly. The typed ones. My mom nodded once. Yes. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. You wrote them. Yes. The word came out calmly. Like she had already accepted the truth long ago. I ran a hand through my hair. Why? Because you deserved an answer when you wrote to him. That wasn't an answer. It was better than nothing. I stared at her in disbelief. You made me believe my father didn't care about me. I never said that. You didn't have to. My voice cracked slightly. The letters sounded like he didn't want to talk to me. My mom looked genuinely uncomfortable for the first time. I was trying to soften the situation. You didn't soften anything, I said. You rewrote my entire relationship with him. She looked at the stack of envelopes again. Then she said quietly, if I had told you the truth back then, it would have caused even more pain. What truth? That your father and I couldn't stand being around each other. That's not a reason to cut him out of my life. It felt like the safest choice at the time. For who? She didn't answer. The silence stretched across the kitchen. Finally, I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since I opened the first letter. Did he know? My mom frowned. Know what? That you were stopping his letters. She hesitated. Eventually, my stomach dropped. So he knew. Yes. And he kept writing anyway? Yes. Neither of us spoke after that. The kitchen felt smaller somehow. I looked down at the letters again. All those years he kept writing. Even after realizing they probably weren't reaching me. That thought hurt more than anything else. After a while, my mom spoke again. By the time you were older, it felt too late to explain. Too late? Yes. Why? Because you had already formed an opinion about him. I laughed quietly. You mean the opinion you helped create? She didn't respond. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. My entire childhood suddenly felt different. Every memory involving my father had been shaped by a story that might not have been true. Eventually, I stood up. I need some air, I said. My mom didn't stop me. Outside, the neighborhood looked exactly the same as it always had. Same sidewalks. Same quiet houses. Same street where I used to wait for the school bus. But everything felt different now. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure who the villain of my childhood story actually was. I walked around the neighborhood for almost an hour. The streets in Raleigh hadn't changed much since I was a kid. Same cracked sidewalks. Same tall oak trees hanging over the road. Even Clara Nelson's childhood house was still there, though someone had repainted it a pale blue. I kept thinking about the letters. Dozens of them. All those years my father kept writing even after realizing they probably weren't reaching me. That detail stayed stuck in my head. Because it meant something important. He hadn't stopped trying. The man I spent most of my life believing didn't care about me had actually been trying to talk to me the entire time. Eventually, I ended up standing in front of my mom's house again. The porch light was on now. For a moment, I considered getting in my rental car and driving away. Flying back to Albany. Pretending this conversation never happened. But the letters were still sitting on the kitchen table. And I couldn't unlearn what I knew now. So I went back inside. My mom was exactly where I left her. Still sitting at the kitchen table. The stack of envelopes was in front of her now. She had separated a few of them and was reading one when I walked in. She looked up slowly. I didn't know he kept writing this many, she said quietly. Something about that sentence surprised me. You never opened them? No. Why not? She thought about that for a moment. I guess I didn't want to know what he was saying. I sat down across from her again. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked something I hadn't asked yet. Did you ever think about telling me the truth? My mom looked tired now. Sometimes. What stopped you? You seemed happy. The answer felt strange. So you just let me keep believing he didn't care about me? She folded her hands together. You weren't thinking about him anymore. Your life was moving forward. I shook my head slowly. That doesn't make it better. I know. Her voice was softer now. For the first time that day, she didn't sound defensive. Just tired. I looked down at the envelopes. You know what the worst part is? I said quietly. What? For years I thought he just didn't care enough to try. My throat tightened slightly. I stopped writing to him because I thought I was bothering someone who didn't want to hear from me. My mom didn't respond. She just stared at the table. Eventually, I asked another question. Did he ever try to see me? Yes. The answer came quickly. My chest tightened again. When? A few times when you were younger. And? I told him it wasn't a good idea. You told him he couldn't see me? I told him it would confuse you. I leaned back in my chair. Everything felt heavier now. Not dramatic. Just heavy. Like pieces of my childhood were slowly shifting into different places. After a while, my mom spoke again. I thought I was doing the right thing. I looked at her. Maybe you did. She seemed surprised by that. You don't sound convinced. I'm not. She nodded slowly. That's fair. Another long silence settled over the kitchen. Then I gathered the letters back into a stack. I'm taking these with me, I said. Of course. I want to read them all. My mom looked down at the envelopes again. He wrote you a lot. Yeah. Her voice was quiet when she spoke again. I didn't realize he cared that much. I didn't answer. Because honestly, neither had I. The next morning I flew back to Albany, New York. When I got home, the first thing I did was place the letters back on my kitchen table. For the next few hours, I read them one by one. They covered years of my life. Birthdays he knew he had missed. School years he wondered about. Small details he imagined about me. In one letter he wrote, I picture you getting taller every year, probably rolling your eyes when your teachers assign homework. In another he wrote, I still have the drawing you sent me in 5th grade. It's pinned above my desk. That line made me stop reading for a minute. Because I had completely forgotten about that drawing. But he hadn't. Toward the end of the stack, the letters became shorter. The handwriting shakier. One of the last ones was dated only a few months before he died. I unfolded the paper carefully. Dear Sophia, I don't know if these letters will ever reach you. Maybe they won't. But writing them makes me feel like I'm still part of your life somehow. If you ever do read them one day, I hope you know I never stopped caring about you. I just didn't know how to fix the distance between us. I read that sentence several times. Then I set the letter down. For most of my life, I believed my father had chosen to disappear. Now I knew something different. He hadn't disappeared. He had been standing on the other side of a wall I didn't even know existed. And the person who built that wall was the same person who raised me. That realization still doesn't come with a clean answer. My mom isn't a villain in my life. She worked hard. She raised me alone. She gave me stability and a home. But at the same time, she also made a decision that shaped how I saw my father for more than 2 decades. A decision I never got to question. Now my father is gone. There's no way to call him. No way to ask what he really felt during all those years. All I have are the letters. Sometimes I sit at my kitchen table late at night and reread them. Not because they change the past, but because they change the story. And that's the part that still sits heavy with me. My entire childhood, I believed my father walked away from us. Now I know he didn't. But knowing that doesn't magically fix anything. It just leaves me with a different question. If you discovered that one of your parents quietly rewrote your relationship with the other for most of your life, would you ever see them the same way again?